The dying woman's hand found his sleeve before he saw her face, and her grip was stronger than anything that thin should be. Marcus Holloway had come to check on a mare about to foal. February night, cold enough to crack stone. The lantern threw orange light across the hay, and that's when he smelled it. Blood and something else. Something final. She lay against the back wall near the empty stalls, wrapped in a coat too thin for the weather. Fever-bright eyes found his. Her lips moved. "Take my baby." The words came out broken, wet. "Please." He saw it then. The bundle pressed to her chest. A flour sack for swaddling. Inside, a small face. Winter blue eyes, wheat-colored hair. "She's all that's good I ever done." The woman's hand slid from his sleeve. Her fingers uncurled. Something small fell from Marcus's pocket into the hay. A brass button, tarnished, nearly worn smooth, but he didn't notice. Couldn't. His whole body had turned to wood. The child looked up at him, didn't cry, didn't reach, just looked. Like she'd been waiting her whole small life for him to finally show up. The wind moaned through the slats, then silence. The woman's chest stopped moving, and Marcus Holloway stood frozen in a barn for the second time in 19 years, watching death take what it wanted while he did nothing at all. He'd built 12,000 acres of fence against the world. Now a 3-year-old girl had walked straight through it. The mare whinnied from her stall, somewhere outside. A coyote called, and another answered. Marcus didn't move. The child sat in the hay beside her mother's body, not crying, not reaching for the woman's face, just sitting there, small hands folded in her lap, watching Marcus with those winter blue eyes, like she was waiting for him to do something useful. His right hand started to shake. He grabbed the lantern hook to steady it. Move, he told himself. Do something. But his legs had turned to posts sunk deep in frozen ground. 19 years since he'd stood like this. Different barn, same smell, same helpless fury rising in his chest like floodwater. Sarah's face flickered behind his eyes. The blood on the hay, the tiny still thing, wrapped in his Sunday shirt because they had nothing else. The child made a sound, small, questioning. Marcus blinked, the ghost image shattered. She was reaching toward her mother now, one hand patting the woman's cold cheek. Once, twice. The way you try to wake someone from a nap. "Mama." The word was barely a whisper, hoarse, like she hadn't used her voice in a long time. Then nothing. She went quiet again, hand falling back to her lap. She looked up at Marcus, waiting. He made himself move. He knelt in the hay, checked the woman's throat for a pulse he knew wasn't there. Her skin was already cooling, waxy under his fingers. Young. Couldn't be more than 25. Pretty, maybe, before whatever life she'd lived had worn her down to bone and desperation. No papers in her pockets, no letters. Nothing but a thin wedding band and a scrap of ribbon tied around her wrist. Faded blue. The kind you'd buy at a general store for a penny. The child watched every move he made. "You got a name?" His voice came out rough, rusty. No answer. "Can you talk?" She looked at him. Looked at her mother. Back at him. Nothing. Marcus sat back on his heels. His hand was shaking again, and this time there was nothing to grab. He pressed it flat against his thigh. "All right," he said. To himself more than her. "All right." He couldn't leave the body here. Couldn't leave the child here. Couldn't stand here all night like a damn fool while the cold crept in and took whatever warmth was left. He stood, took off his coat, wrapped it around the child. She was so small it swallowed her whole, sleeves dragging in the hay, collar up past her ears. She didn't resist, didn't help. Just let him do it, like she'd learned long ago, that fighting didn't change anything. That thought hit him somewhere he didn't expect. "I'm going to pick you up now," he said. "Carry you to the house. You understand?" She looked at him. It's warm there. Food, a bed. Something flickered in her eyes. Not trust. Nothing that soft. More like calculation. Assessment. A creature deciding whether this new danger was worse than the one she knew. She raised her arms. Marcus lifted her. She weighed nothing. Less than a feed sack, less than a newborn calf. Her small hands found his collar and gripped, held on. He turned toward the barn door. Didn't look back at the body. Couldn't. The walk to the main house was 200 yards. Felt like 200 miles. The kitchen door banged open, and Clara Whitmore dropped her cup of warm milk on the floor. Lord have mercy. Woman in the barn. Marcus's voice sounded strange to his own ears. Flat, far away. Dead. This is her child. Clara stood there in her nightdress and shawl, milk pooling around her bare feet, staring at the bundle in his arms. Then something shifted in her face. The shock smoothed out, replaced by something older, steadier. She'd seen death before, held it in her own arms. "Give her to me." Marcus didn't move. His hands had locked around the child like rigging frozen to a mast. "Mr. Holloway." Clara stepped closer, glass crunching under her feet. Her voice dropped soft. "Let me take her." She needs warmth, food, a woman's hands. He knew she was right, knew he should hand the child over and walk away, let Clara do what Clara did, what she'd always done. Hold this house together while he built his walls higher and higher. But his fingers wouldn't open. The child looked up at him, then at Clara, then back at him. She reached out, not toward Clara, toward his face. One small hand pressed flat against his cheek, cold. Her fingers were so cold, something cracked in his chest. Hairline fracture. The kind you don't feel until later, when the whole thing gives way. It's all right. Clara's hands covered his, gentle but firm. I've got her now. His grip loosened. Clara lifted the child away, and the sudden absence of that small weight felt like something being torn out of him. I'll see to her, Clara said. You go. Do what needs doing. He stood in the kitchen doorway. Couldn't make himself leave. Couldn't make himself stay. Clara settled the child on a chair near the stove. Started working at the buttons of that too-big coat. The child's eyes stayed fixed on Marcus the whole time. Watching him, waiting. Like she knew something he didn't. Like she could see straight through the walls he'd spent 19 years building and found nothing but empty rooms on the other side. Mr. Holloway. Clara didn't look up. The body won't keep. He nodded, turned, walked out into the cold. Behind him, he heard Clara's voice go soft and sweet, the way you'd talk to a spooked animal. You're safe now, little one? You hear me? Safe. The wind cut through his shirt. He'd forgotten his coat was still wrapped around the child. He didn't go back for it. The child ate like she'd never seen food before, and watched the door like she expected someone to take it away. Morning light came thin and gray through the kitchen windows. The storm had blown itself out sometime before dawn, leaving the world quiet and white and cold. Clara had been up for hours. Marcus could tell by the state of the kitchen, bread rising under a cloth, coffee hot on the stove, and the child sitting at the big oak table in clothes that didn't exist yesterday. A dress pieced together from old flour sacks, soft from 100 washings. A knitted shawl that used to belong to someone Marcus couldn't remember. The child stared at the bowl in front of her, oatmeal with honey, steam rising. Go on, Clara said. She sat across from the child, her own bowl untouched. It's good. Watch. She lifted her spoon, took a bite, made a show of swallowing. See? Nothing bad. The child looked at the oatmeal, looked at Clara, looked at the door. Then she grabbed the spoon in her fist, wrong grip, like she'd never held one, and started shoveling food into her mouth so fast she barely chewed. Her other arm curled around the bowl, protective, like someone might snatch it away. Marcus stood in the doorway, his usual spot, close enough to see, far enough to leave. Clara caught his eye. Something passed between them. Not words, just understanding. This child had known hunger, real hunger, the kind that teaches you to eat fast and trust nothing. She's been bathed, Clara said, not looking at him now. Checked her over. Thin as a rail, but no injuries I could find. No fever? The mother? Buried. East pasture, under the cottonwood. Zeke helped me this morning before first light. The cottonwood. Marcus's chest tightened. He'd picked that spot himself years ago, meant to bury Sarah there, back when he still thought the proper things mattered. Before he burned her dress and kept nothing but a button, and let the grief turn to stone inside him. We say any words? Zeke read from Psalms. I sang a hymn. Clara paused. Didn't seem right to put her in the ground without something. The child finished her oatmeal, scraped the bowl clean with her fingers, licked them, then sat there, hands folded, staring at the empty bowl like she was memorizing it. She want more? Marcus asked. I expect she'd eat till she burst if I let her. Clara rose, took the bowl, filled it again, set it down gently. Slow this time, honey. It's not going anywhere, I promise. The child looked up at Clara, then at the oatmeal. She ate slower. Still too fast, but slower, learning. Already learning that this place had different rules. By afternoon, the child had become Clara's shadow. Wherever Clara went, pantry, parlor, back porch, the child followed, never more than 3 feet away, never touching, but always close, like a barn cat that hadn't decided yet whether to stay or bolt. Clara talked to her the whole time, steady stream of words, soft and warm, not expecting answers. This here's where I keep the preserves. Strawberry mostly. Mr. Holloway's got a sweet tooth he thinks nobody knows about. And this is the good flour, the kind I use for biscuits. You like biscuits? Of course you do. Everybody likes biscuits. The child watched, listened, said nothing. Marcus found reasons to pass through the kitchen, check the wood box, refill his coffee cup, ask Clara questions that didn't need asking. Each time his eyes went to the child. Each time her eyes were already on him. Around 3 o'clock, Zeke came in from the cold, stomping snow off his boots, slapping his gloves against his thigh. He stopped dead when he saw the child sitting by the stove. Well now. His weathered face softened into something that might have been a smile, if Zeke's face remembered how. "Who's this little coyote?" The child studied him. No fear, just that same careful watchfulness. Zeke crossed the kitchen slow, the way you'd approach a spooked horse. His bad leg dragged a little. Old wound from a Comanche arrow, 30 years gone but never quite healed. He lowered himself to one knee with a grunt, bringing his face level with hers. "You got a name, little miss?" Silence. "That's all right." Zeke nodded like she'd said something profound. "Names come when they're ready, no rush." He reached up, made a show of looking confused, then pulled a penny from behind her ear. Old cavalry trick. He'd done it 1,000 times for ranch hands' kids, for children in every town, from here to Cheyenne. The child's eyes went wide. Not a smile. Not yet. But something shifted in her face. The first expression Marcus had seen that wasn't blank survival. Curiosity, maybe. Wonder. She reached for the penny. Zeke let her take it. "That's yours now," he said. "For luck." The child turned the penny over in her small hands, studied it like it was made of gold. Then she looked up at Zeke, and for just a second, barely a heartbeat, the corner of her mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. From the doorway, Marcus watched. His hand gripped the frame until his knuckles went white. Clara was humming something low and sweet while she worked the bread dough. An old hymn. The tune threaded through the kitchen like smoke, familiar and far away. "Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home." The sound hit Marcus somewhere he didn't expect. Sarah used to hum while she worked. Different songs, same feeling. That sense of a house being held together by something softer than nails and timber. He turned away before anyone could see his face. Evening fell early, the way it does in February. By 5 o'clock, the windows were black mirrors, and Clara had lit the lamps throughout the house. The child had been put to bed in the small room off the kitchen, the one meant for a live-in cook, never used. Clara had made it up with quilts and a feather pillow and a candle burning low on the dresser. "In case she wakes scared," Clara explained, "so she knows where she is." Marcus sat in his study. Whiskey poured. Untouched. The house was quiet, that old familiar silence he'd lived in for 19 years. But it felt different tonight. Fuller, somehow, like the walls were holding their breath. Clara appeared in his doorway. She didn't knock. Never had. "She's sleeping." Clara wiped her hands on her apron, a habit she had even when her hands were clean. "First time in a real bed, I'd wager." Took her a while to understand she could lie down. Kept sitting up, looking at the door, waiting for someone to come take it away. "That's what I figured." Silence. The fire cracked and settled. "What do we know?" Marcus asked. "About the mother." "Nothing. No papers, no letters. Just the clothes on her back and the child in her arms." Clara paused. "And a wedding band. Thin, cheap. The kind a man buys when he can't afford better but wants to do right anyway." "Someone's looking for them." "Maybe." Clara's voice was careful. "Or maybe someone's the reason they were running in the first place." That thought sat between them like a stone in still water. "What are you going to do with her, Mr. Holloway?" The question he'd been avoiding all day, all night. Since the moment that small hand had pressed against his cheek in the kitchen. "There's the orphanage," Clara continued. "In Rollins. Judge Whitfield's place. Clean, they say, well run. I know what orphanages are." "Do you?" He looked up. Clara held his gaze. Steady, unafraid. She'd never been afraid of him. Even in the early days, when his grief was fresh and his anger was a living thing pacing the halls of this house, she'd never flinched. "She could have a proper home there," Clara said. "Other children, schooling, people trained to care for orphans. She's not going to an orphanage." The words came out before he knew he was going to say them. Hard, final. Clara nodded slowly, like she'd expected that answer, like she'd been waiting for it. "Then what?" "She stays, for now." "For now," Clara repeated the words, tasting them. "And then what? A week? A month? Until you get tired of playing house and ship her off anyway?" "I don't—" "Oh, no." His voice cracked on the last word. He hated the sound of it. "I don't know, Clara. I just—" He stopped, pressed his hand flat on the desk to keep it from shaking. Clara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Softer, older. The voice of someone who'd buried her own child and learned to breathe around the hole it left. "Grief ain't a debt you pay off, Mr. Holloway." She let the words settle like dust after a storm. "It's a seed. Question is what you let it grow into." She turned, walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. "That child needs more than a roof. She needs someone who will stay." A pause. "You might ask yourself if you're still capable of that." She left. Marcus sat alone, fire dying, whiskey warming in the glass he wouldn't drink. Outside, the wind picked up. He thought about the barn, the hay, the brass button lying somewhere in the dark, waiting. He didn't go looking for it, not yet. She still wouldn't speak, but she'd started to follow him, and that was worse. 4 days passed. The child learned the rhythms of the house, when Clara started the coffee, when Zeke stomped in for his afternoon cup, when Marcus walked the property line and came back smelling of cold air and horse sweat. She watched everything, remembered everything, said nothing. On the 5th morning, Marcus went to the barn to check on the mare and her new filly. The foal was steady on her legs now, nursing well, a bright copper color that would darken to bay by summer. He stood at the stall door watching them when he heard the creak of hinges behind him. The child stood in the barn doorway, alone. "Clara, know you're out here?" No answer. She walked past him, small feet careful on the hay-strewn floor, and stopped at the back of the barn, the exact spot where her mother had died. Marcus's chest tightened. "You shouldn't be back here." She didn't move, just stood there, looking down at the hay. Then she crouched, reached into the scattered straw, and pulled something out. The brass button. Marcus stopped breathing. She turned it over in her fingers, studying it the way she'd studied Zeke's penny. The tarnished surface caught the thin light from the door. She traced the faded floral pattern with her thumb. "Give that here." His voice came out wrong, too sharp, too hungry. The child looked up at him, no fear in her face, just that steady, measuring gaze. "That's not yours," he said. Softer now, but his hand was shaking. He shoved it in his pocket. She rose, walked toward him, stopped close enough that he could see the hay dust in her hair, the pale freckles across her nose. She held out the button, offering. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The mare shifted in her stall. The filly made a small sound. Outside, the wind whispered through the slats. Marcus took the button. The metal was cold, lighter than he remembered. He could barely see the pattern anymore. 20 years of handling had worn it almost smooth. 20 years of carrying it. 20 years of never showing it to anyone. Now this child had found it, touched it, given it back to him like it was nothing, like it was just a button. He put it in his pocket. Didn't explain. She watched him, didn't ask. Something had shifted between them. He couldn't name it. Wasn't sure he wanted to. "Come on," he said. "Clara will be looking for you." He walked toward the door, heard her small footsteps following, didn't look back to see if she was keeping up. He already knew she was. That night, Marcus sat on the front porch despite the cold. He'd found an old pack of cigarettes in his desk, hadn't smoked in years, but tonight his hands needed something to do. The stars were hard and bright, no moon. The kind of darkness that swallowed sound and made a man feel small. Zeke's boots announced him before his voice did. The old foreman settled into the other chair with a grunt, pulling a flask from his coat. "Prior permission to speak freely, boss?" "When'd you ever need permission?" Zeke snorted, took a pull from the flask. "You look like 10 miles of bad road. Feel like it, too." Silence. Smoke. The cold pressed in from all sides. "You gonna tell me about her?" Zeke asked. "The girl. Nothing to tell. She's an orphan. She needs a place. She needs more than a place." Marcus drew on the cigarette. The ember flared orange in the dark. "I remember when you and Miss Sarah first came through," Zeke said. His voice had gone careful, the way it did when he was walking around something breakable. "What was it, 87? 86. Right, 86. Zeke nodded. "You didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. Driving cattle for the Barquet. Living in that line shack up on the North Ridge. Miss Sarah used to bring biscuits out to the boys on Roundup. You remember?" Marcus remembered. He remembered everything. "She believed in you," Zeke continued. "Before you believed in yourself? Before anybody did. Said you were going to be something someday." A pause. "She was right, I suppose. You became something all right. What's your point, Zeke?" "My point is, you was a good man once, before you got rich enough to forget it." The words landed like a fist to the chest. Marcus stubbed out the cigarette on the porch rail. "That man's dead." "Is he?" Zeke's voice was quiet. "Or is he just hiding?" Marcus stood. Conversation over. But Zeke spoke again before he could reach the door. "She looks at you like you hung the moon, you know. That little girl." The old foreman's voice had gone soft, almost sad. "Like you're the only safe thing in the world. That's a heavy thing to be for someone. You might want to figure out if you're up for carrying it." Marcus went inside without answering, but the words followed him. Into the study, into the whiskey he finally drank, into the dark hours where sleep wouldn't come. Like, you're the only safe thing in the world. He thought about the button in his pocket, the child's hand holding it out to him, the way she'd given it back like it was nothing, like it was everything. Morning came cold and bright. First sun they'd seen in a week. Marcus came to breakfast. Clara nearly dropped the coffee pot. In 3 years, she could count on one hand the times he'd taken a meal in the kitchen. He usually ate alone in his study, or didn't eat at all, But here he was, pulling out a chair, sitting down at the oak table across from the child like it was something he did every day. Clara set a plate in front of him without comment. Eggs, salt pork, biscuits with honey. She poured his coffee and went back to the stove, but Marcus could feel her watching. The child was watching too, fork frozen halfway to her mouth. Those winter blue eyes tracking his every movement. He picked up his biscuit, bit into it, chewed. The child set down her fork, reached across the table, pushed her own biscuit toward him. The gesture was so small, so quiet, that Marcus almost missed it. But Clara made a sound, half breath, half something else, and turned away to face the stove. "I'm not hungry," Marcus said. "You eat it." The child didn't take it back, just left it there, offering. Clara's voice came rough. "She's giving it to you, Mr. Holloway. Take the gift." He looked at the biscuit, looked at the child. Her face was serious, intent, like this mattered. Like she needed him to understand something she didn't have words for. He took it, bit into it, swallowed around the tightness in his throat. The biscuit tasted like salt, but maybe that was just him. "Thank you," he said. The child nodded, once, then went back to her eggs. Something had passed between them, a transaction, a treaty. Marcus didn't know what he'd agreed to, but he knew there was no going back from it. After breakfast, he headed for the door. Work to do, fences to check. The world outside this kitchen still existed, still demanded things from him. He was halfway across the parlor when he heard the footsteps behind him. Small, quick, determined. The child stood at the kitchen threshold, watching him. "I've got work," he said. She didn't move. Clara appeared behind her, drying her hands on a towel. "She wants to go with you." "It's cold. She should stay inside." "I'll bundle her up. She needs air. Needs to see there's a world outside these walls." Clara paused. "Needs to see you come back. Needs to see you come back." The words hit somewhere deep, somewhere he'd boarded up and left for dead. "Fine," he heard himself say. "But she stays close." Clara had the child wrapped in 2 coats and a wool scarf before Marcus could change his mind. He opened the front door, stepped onto the porch. The child followed, stopped beside him, looked up. Then she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small, cold, surprisingly strong. They wrapped around 2 of his fingers and held on like she was anchoring herself to the earth. Marcus stood frozen, the last hand that had held his like that. He couldn't finish the thought. "Come on," he said. His voice sounded strange. "Let's check the horses." They walked toward the barn. The child matched his pace, half running to keep up, never letting go. Halfway there, Marcus saw it. A rider on the ridge. East side, maybe half a mile out. Just sitting there, watching. Marcus stopped. The child stopped with him. The rider didn't move, didn't wave, just watched. Then, slow as smoke, he turned his horse and disappeared over the ridge. Marcus stared at the empty skyline. His hand tightened around the child's fingers. "Mr. Holloway?" Clara's voice from the porch. "Everything all right?" "Fine," he called back. "Just thought I saw something." But his eyes stayed on that ridge long after there was nothing to see. And his grip on the child's hand didn't loosen until they reached the barn door. The telegram arrived at noon. By sundown, Marcus Holloway learned he'd been harboring a dead man's stolen property. He saw the dust cloud first. 3 riders, coming up the main road, moving too slow to be trouble, too deliberate to be friendly. Marcus was on the porch when they arrived. The child was inside with Clara, learning to knead bread dough. Safe, hidden, though he didn't know yet why that word had jumped into his mind. Judge Harlan Whitfield dismounted first. 63 years old, silver-haired, wearing a black coat that cost more than most ranch hands made in a year. 2 deputies flanked him, young men with badges and rifles, looking uncomfortable. "Marcus." Whitfield tipped his hat. "Been a while." "Judge." Marcus didn't move from the porch, didn't invite them closer. "What brings you out?" "A matter of some delicacy." Whitfield pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Concerning a child." The word landed like a stone in still water. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." Whitfield climbed the porch steps, close enough now that Marcus could smell the bay rum on his collar. "A woman died on your property 8 days ago. You buried her in your east pasture without notifying the sheriff, and you've been keeping her child ever since." Marcus said nothing. The woman's name was Annabelle Crofton. Whitfield unfolded the paper. "Widow of Thomas Crofton, who owned the Silver Bell mine in Colorado until his death 6 months ago. Suspicious circumstances. That death. Never fully investigated." "I don't see what that has to do with me." The child, Marcus. The child is Margaret Crofton, sole heir to her father's estate, worth approximately $200,000. $200,000. The number hung in the cold air between them. "Annabelle took the child and ran 3 months ago," Whitfield continued. "The family has been searching ever since, and now that family wants her back." "What family?" Edmund Crofton, Thomas's brother. He's filed for custody, claims Annabelle was unstable, claims she kidnapped the child. Kidnapped her own daughter? The law is clear on these matters. Whitfield's voice was patient, almost kind. The child goes to the nearest male relative. Edmund has the papers. He has the standing. He has the law on his side. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. The law can go to hell. That's not a position I'd recommend taking. Whitfield folded the paper and tucked it away. I'm not here to take her today, Marcus. I'm here as a courtesy, to give you time to make arrangements. What kind of arrangements? There's an orphanage in Rollins. Proper facility. The child can stay there until the custody hearing. It's cleaner that way, less complicated. The kitchen door opened. Clara stepped onto the back porch, the child half hidden behind her skirts. The girl's winter blue eyes found Marcus across the yard. She looked scared. First time he'd seen that expression on her face. Whitfield followed his gaze. His expression softened, just slightly. She seems well cared for. I'll note that in my report. She's not going to an orphanage. Marcus, she's not going anywhere. Whitfield sighed. You're not her kin. You're not her anything. You're a bachelor rancher who found her in a barn. He put his hat back on. I'll return in 3 days with the proper paperwork. I suggest you use that time to find a lawyer. He mounted his horse. The deputies followed. One more thing, Whitfield said, turning in his saddle. Edmund Crofton arrived in Cheyenne yesterday. He's on his way here now. Whatever you decide to do, I'd decide it quickly. They rode off. The dust settled. The world went quiet. Marcus stood on the porch, watching until they disappeared over the ridge. The same ridge where the rider had been watching. He found Clara in his kitchen, the child pressed close against her side. You heard? Enough. Clara's face was set like stone. Edmund Crofton, I know that name. Marcus pulled out a chair, sat down hard. How? He came through Rollins 5 years back, before I started working here. Clara's hands moved automatically, wiping the counter, straightening the flour tin, keeping busy so she didn't have to look at him. He bought a girl from the orphanage, 14 years old, said she was a distant cousin he'd been searching for. Had papers and everything. What happened to her? Clara stopped wiping. Her hands went still. Nobody knows. She was never seen again. 6 months later, another cousin turned up dead in Denver. Young woman, maybe 20, same story. Edmund had taken her in, given her a home, and then she shook her head. Accidents, they said. Terrible accidents. Marcus looked at the child. She was watching him again. That same steady gaze, old beyond her years. You're saying Annabelle didn't run to somewhere? She ran from someone. I'm saying a woman doesn't die in a stranger's barn in the middle of winter unless she's more scared of what's behind her than what's ahead. The child reached out, touched Marcus's hand where it lay on the table. Her small fingers traced the veins on the back of his wrist. He thought about the brass button in his pocket. 20 years of carrying it. 20 years of it meaning the same thing. Sarah is dead because you weren't enough. But now it meant something else. Now it was a test. If you let them take this child, you are exactly the man who let Sarah die. Cold, calculating, choosing safety over love. She's not going with him. His voice came out low, certain. I don't care what papers he has. I don't care what the law says. She's not going. Clara nodded slowly. They'll come back with a court order. Then I'll need better arguments than a court order. You'll need a miracle, Mr. Holloway. He stood, walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the snow orange and gold. Then I'll find one. Behind him, the child climbed down from her chair, crossed the kitchen, stood beside him at the window. She didn't take his hand this time, just stood there, close enough to touch, watching the horizon with him, waiting for whatever was coming. The chair where she sat at breakfast was empty. The room was silent. And Marcus Holloway felt the world crack open beneath him for the second time in his life. He stood in the kitchen doorway, heart slamming against his ribs before his mind caught up with his eyes. The chair was empty because it was 6 a.m. The child was still asleep. Clara was at the stove, stirring oatmeal, humming low under her breath. Nothing was wrong. But for 3 seconds, 3 endless, airless seconds, he'd been back in that line shack, looking at Sarah's empty face, feeling the world drop out from under him like a trap door. Holloway? Clara turned, saw something in his face. What is it? Nothing. He forced his legs to move, poured himself coffee. His hand was shaking again. Just didn't sleep. Clara watched him, but said nothing. The humming had stopped. 3 days had passed since Whitfield's visit. Marcus had hired a lawyer from Cheyenne, a man named Garrett, who charged $3 an hour and spoke in sentences so long they made Marcus's head ache. Papers were being filed. Arguments were being prepared. The wheels of law were turning, slow and grinding, and Marcus had to believe they would turn his way. But Edmund Crofton had arrived in Broken Creek last night. Zeke had brought the news after sundown. Staying at Mabel's, Zeke had said. Brought 3 men with him. The kind that don't talk much and carry their guns like they know how to use them. Marcus set down his coffee. I'm going to town. Clara turned from the stove. That's not wise. I need to see him. Need to know what we're dealing with. You know what you're dealing with? A man who makes people disappear. Clara's voice was sharp. You ride into town looking for a fight. You'll give him exactly what he wants. A reason to call you unstable, dangerous, unfit. I'm not looking for a fight. Then what are you looking for? He didn't have an answer, just a burning in his chest that wouldn't let him sit still. Watch her, he said. Don't let her out of your sight. He was saddling his horse when Zeke found him in the barn. You want company? No, stay here. Anyone comes on this property that isn't me, you know what to do. Zeke nodded. His hand rested on the rifle leaning against the stall door. Be careful, boss. Men, like Crofton, don't fight fair. Neither do I. The ride to town took 40 minutes. The sky was iron gray, heavy with snow that hadn't fallen yet. The air tasted like metal, a storm coming. The worst kind, the kind that blew in fast and stayed for days. Mabel's boarding house sat at the end of Main Street. Marcus tied his horse to the post and walked inside without knocking. Edmund Crofton was in the parlor, sitting by the fire, reading a newspaper like he had all the time in the world. He looked up when Marcus entered, smiled. Mr. Holloway, I was hoping you'd come. Edmund Crofton was smaller than Marcus expected. Soft hands, pale skin, the kind of man who'd never done a day's labor in his life. His morning clothes were immaculate, his eyes red-rimmed. Grief or a performance of it? Please. Edmund gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Let's talk like civilized men. Marcus didn't sit. I'm not here to talk. No? Edmund folded the newspaper, set it aside. Then why are you here? To tell you that child isn't going with you, not today, not ever. Edmund's smile didn't waver. I understand your attachment, Mr. Holloway. Truly, I do. You found her in tragic circumstances. You've cared for her these past weeks. That's admirable. He paused. But she's my brother's daughter, my blood, and I have a legal and moral obligation to raise her as family. Your brother's wife ran from you, died running from you. Something flickered behind Edmund's eyes, there and gone. Annabelle was troubled, paranoid. Grief does terrible things to the mind. He spread his hands. I don't blame her. I only want what's best for the child. You don't know what's best for her. You don't know anything about her. And you do? Edmund leaned forward. You've known her, 2 weeks? I've watched her grow since she was born. I held her at her christening. I was there when she took her first steps. His voice dropped. Intimate. Can you say the same, Mr. Holloway? Marcus's hands clenched at his sides. The law is on my side, Edmund continued. The judge is on my side. Public opinion is on my side. A grieving uncle trying to reunite with his orphaned niece, blocked by a stranger with no legal standing. He stood, moved closer. You can't win this. You know that. So why fight? Because she's scared of you. The words came out before Marcus could stop them. Edmund's mask slipped, just for a heartbeat, something cold beneath, hungry. Then the smile returned. Children are scared of many things. They grow out of it. Not this. Not you. Edmund studied him. You're a businessman, Mr. Holloway. You've built an empire out here in the wilderness. Surely you understand that sentiment makes poor investments. He walked to the window, looked out at the gray sky. I'm a patient man. I can wait for the courts, but patience has its limits. He turned back. Think about what you're risking, your reputation, your standing in this community, your fortune, if the legal fees mount high enough. And for what? A child who isn't yours, who will never be yours. Marcus stepped closer, close enough to see the fine lines around Edmund's eyes, the slight tremor in his manicured hands. She's not a piece of property, Marcus said. She's not an investment. She's a child, and I'm going to make sure she never has to be afraid of you again. He walked out before Edmund could respond. The cold air hit him like a slap. The first snowflakes were falling, fat and slow. The storm was here. He mounted his horse and rode for home, the taste of metal still sharp on his tongue. The storm hit before he reached the property line. Wind came screaming down from the mountains, driving snow sideways, turning the world to white chaos. Marcus's horse fought him every step, head down, eyes wild. He gave her head and let her find the way home by instinct. By the time he reached the barn, he couldn't feel his hands. He stumbled inside, pulled the door shut against the howling dark. The mare in her stall whinnied. The filly pressed close to her mother's side. The wind shrieked through the slats. That same hollow moan he'd heard the night Annabelle died. The night Sarah died. Different barn, same sound, same helpless fury clawing at his chest. He sank down against the back wall, the exact spot. He didn't mean to. His legs just stopped working, and then he was sitting in the hay, and the smell hit him, and suddenly he wasn't in 1908 anymore. He was in 1889, Line Shack, January, Sarah screaming his name. Marcus, don't leave me. I have to get the doctor, I have to. Don't leave me alone, please. I'm scared. I'll be back, I promise. I'll be back. He wasn't back in time. The doctor wouldn't come for a man with no money. By the time Marcus found the midwife, by the time he rode back through the blizzard, Sarah had stopped screaming. The baby had stopped crying. Everything had stopped. He'd knelt in the hay beside her, held her hand, still warm, not yet stiff, talked to her like she could hear him, apologized, begged, made promises he couldn't keep to a woman who couldn't answer. Then he'd cut a button from her dress and burned everything else, because keeping it would have killed him. But he'd kept it anyway, kept the grief, built walls around it, let it harden into something that looked like strength but was really just scar tissue. 19 years. 19 years of pretending he was whole. The wind screamed. Marcus screamed with it, Sarah's name. Torn from his throat, lost in the storm, he screamed until his voice broke, until there was nothing left, until the silence after felt like drowning. And in that silence, a small sound, a footstep. He looked up. The child stood in the barn doorway, barefoot, nightgown, snow in her hair. She must have followed him, must have slipped out while Clara wasn't watching, must have walked through the blizzard in nothing but cotton and faith. She didn't speak, didn't cry. She walked toward him, slow, careful, the way you'd approach a wounded animal. And then she sat down in the hay beside him. Her small hand found his arm, rested there, not gripping, just present. She was shivering. He should get her inside, should wrap her in something warm, should do all the things a responsible adult would do. Instead, he broke. The tears came, ugly, wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. 19 years of grief, pouring out of him like blood from a wound finely lanced. The child didn't flinch, didn't pull away. She leaned into him, small and warm and alive, and she stayed. Clara found them like that. Huddled together in the hay, the storm dying outside, the first gray light of morning creeping through the slats. She didn't scold, didn't panic, just wrapped a blanket around them both and knelt in the hay beside Marcus. How long? I don't know. His voice was wrecked, raw. Hours, maybe. The child had fallen asleep against his chest. Her breathing was slow and even, peaceful. Clara studied his face. Whatever she saw there made her expression soften. Tell me, she said. And he did. Everything. Sarah. The baby, the doctor who wouldn't come, the line shack, the blood, the button he'd carried for 20 years like a penance he couldn't name. I left her. The words scraped out of him. I left her alone because I thought the doctor mattered more than staying, and when I came back... He couldn't finish. Clara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was low, steady. You did what you thought was right. It wasn't enough. Never is. She reached out, touched his hand. But that's not the same as wrong. I should have stayed, should have been there. Should have. Should have what? Watched her die? Clara shook her head. You rode through a blizzard to find help. You did everything a man could do. The winter killed her. Mr. Holloway, the poverty killed her. The doctor who wouldn't come for a poor man's wife, he killed her. Her grip tightened. You just happened to be the one left standing. Marcus looked down at the child sleeping in his arms. Her small face, her wheat-colored hair, the way she'd walked through a storm to find him. I can't lose her too. Then don't. Clara's voice was fierce now, urgent. But you can't save her by hiding her behind walls. You can't protect her by keeping her at arm's length. She doesn't need a fortress, Marcus. She needs a father. The word hit him like a physical blow. Father. He hadn't thought of himself that way. Hadn't let himself. But looking at the child now, this small, silent, stubborn creature who'd followed him into a blizzard because she'd rather freeze with him than be warm without him, he understood. She'd chosen him, the way Sarah had chosen him all those years ago. The question was whether he'd be brave enough to choose her back. The storm had passed. Outside, the first light was turning the snow to gold. Marcus stood. The child stirred, but didn't wake. He carried her toward the house, Clara walking beside him. For the first time in 19 years, the weight on his chest felt different. Not lighter, not yet, but possible to bear. He rode to the line shack at dawn. The first time in 19 years he'd gone there on purpose. The storm had left the world scrubbed clean. Snow lay thick on the fields, unmarked except for the tracks his horse made. The sky was pale blue, washed out, the kind of empty that made a man feel small. 8 miles to the north ridge. 8 miles of silence broken only by hoofbeats and the creak of saddle leather. Marcus hadn't told anyone where he was going. Clara was with the child. Zeke was patrolling the property line, watching for Edmund's men. The lawyer from Cheyenne was drafting motions that might or might not matter. None of it touched him. Not this morning. This morning, he needed to see the place where everything had ended. And maybe, if he was lucky, I'll figure out how to begin again. The line shack came into view around mid-morning, or what was left of it. The roof had caved in years ago. One wall had collapsed entirely, the logs rotting into the frozen ground. Snow had drifted through the gaps, filling the interior with white. The chimney still stood, stubborn, useless, pointing at the sky like a broken finger. Marcus dismounted, tied the horse to a dead pine, stood there. The wind was gentle here, almost kind. It moved through the ruins with a soft whisper, stirring the snow into small spirals that rose and fell and rose again. He hadn't been back since the day he'd carried Sarah's body out. Hadn't wanted to, couldn't, but he was here now. He walked to what used to be the door, stepped over the fallen timber, stood inside the shell of the place where his wife had died. The layout was still visible beneath the snow and rot. Here, the stove had been. There, the bed, just a frame of pine boards and a straw mattress. Against the far wall, the small table, where they'd eaten their meals and planned their future. And on the floor, beneath the snow, a dark stain that 20 years of weather hadn't quite erased. Marcus knelt, brushed the snow away with his bare hands. The cold bit into his fingers, but he didn't stop. He cleared the stain until he could see it, faded brown against gray wood, the shape of something that used to be a life. "I'm sorry." The words came out cracked, barely a whisper. "I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I wasn't enough. I'm sorry I built a goddamn empire and you got dirt." The wind stirred, no answer, no absolution. He hadn't expected any. He stayed there a long time, kneeling in the snow, hands numb, watching the light change as the sun climbed higher. The memories came whether he wanted them or not. Sarah laughing at something he'd said. Sarah singing while she cooked. Sarah lying beside him, in this very spot, her hand on her swollen belly, talking about names for the baby. If it's a girl, I want to call her Hope. That's not a name. That's a prayer. Same thing, isn't it? He'd forgotten that, buried it with everything else. But now it surfaced, sharp and bright, and he couldn't push it back down. Hope. She'd wanted to name their daughter Hope. Clara's voice echoed in his head. Grief ain't a debt you pay off. It's a seed. Question is what you let it grow into. What had he let it grow into? Walls. Distance. A fortune measured in cattle and land, and the respect of men who feared him more than they liked him. A house with 14 rooms and no one in them. A life so carefully protected that nothing could get in, including anything worth living for. He'd thought he was building a fortress. Turns out he'd been building a tomb. But the child had walked in anyway, walked right through the walls like they weren't there. Sat down beside him in the hay and stayed. She'd chosen him. And Sarah had chosen him too, all those years ago. A broke drover with nothing but ambition and a willingness to work himself half to death. She'd seen something in him worth believing in. He'd spent 19 years trying to prove her wrong. Marcus stood. His knees ached. His hands were raw from the cold. He didn't care. He looked at the stain one last time, spoke to it like Sarah could hear. I couldn't save you. I know that now. I did everything I could, and it wasn't enough, and I've been punishing myself ever since. He paused, swallowed hard. But there's a little girl back at the ranch who needs someone to stay. And I think maybe you sent her to me. I don't know. Maybe that's crazy. But I'm going to fight for her, Sarah. Not because she can replace what we lost, because she's here. And so am I. And maybe that's enough. The wind picked up, just for a moment, almost like an answer. Then it settled, and the world went still. Marcus walked back to his horse, mounted up, looked at the ruined shack one last time. A seed, Clara had said. What did you let it grow into? He'd let it grow into walls, into money, into nothing. But seeds could be replanted. Walls could come down, and nothing. Nothing could become something if you were brave enough to try. Maybe this is what you meant, Clara, he said to no one. Maybe this is what a seed's supposed to become. He turned his horse toward home. The ride back felt shorter. The weight in his chest felt different. Not gone, but changed. Ahead of him, the ranch waited. The child waited. The fight of his life waited. And, for the first time in 19 years, Marcus Holloway rode toward something instead of away. The courtroom smelled of dust and old paper. Marcus Holloway had built his fortune avoiding places like this. Now everything he'd learned to want stood on the other side of a judge's desk. 2 days later, Marcus stood in his bedroom, looking at a suit he hadn't worn in 19 years. Black wool, white shirt, the collar was yellowed, the fabric smelled of cedar and thyme. He'd worn it to Sarah's memorial service, the small gathering at the Lutheran church, 6 people in attendance, Reverend Adler saying words that meant nothing. He'd sworn he'd never wear it again. Clara appeared in the doorway, studied him for a moment, then crossed the room and started working at his collar, straightening what didn't need straightening. You look almost human, she said. That's the idea. She stepped back, nodded once. You'll do. He found the child in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, hands folded, watching the door, waiting for him, the way she always waited now. He knelt beside her chair, brought himself down to her level. I have to go talk to some people, he said, about keeping you safe. You understand? She looked at him, those winter blue eyes, steady and old. I'm coming back, I promise. The words caught in his throat, the same words he'd said to Sarah, the promise he'd broken. The child reached into the pocket of her dress, the flour sack dress Clara had made, and pulled something out, the brass button. She must have found it again. Must have taken it from his coat, or his desk, or wherever he'd left it last. Kept it, carried it. She held it out, offering, the same gesture she'd made in the barn. You want me to take it? She nodded. First clear response she'd ever given. Marcus took the button. The metal was warm from her hand. He closed his fingers around it, felt the worn floral pattern press into his palm. I'll bring it back, he said. She nodded again. Then she did something she'd never done before. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his chest. Just for a moment, a heartbeat. Then she pulled back and folded her hands in her lap, waiting. Marcus stood, put the button in his pocket, walked out the door. The ride to Rollins took 3 hours. He didn't hurry. The courthouse was a 2-story brick building at the center of town. Flags hung limp in the still air. A small crowd had gathered outside. Word traveled fast in the territory, and a custody dispute involving the richest man in the county was better than any traveling show. Marcus ignored them, walked up the steps, through the doors, into the courtroom. Judge Whitfield sat at the bench, black robe, gray face, the weight of the law pressed into every line. Edmund Crofton sat at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, a thin man from Denver with spectacles and a voice like oil. Marcus's own lawyer, Garrett, was already seated at the defendant's table, papers spread before him. Marcus took his place. The room fell silent. This hearing will come to order, Whitfield said. The matter before us is the custody of the minor child Margaret Crofton, currently in the care of Mr. Marcus Holloway. Mr. Pemberton, you may proceed. Edmund's lawyer stood, cleared his throat. Your Honor, the facts of this case are simple. The child is the sole heir of Thomas Crofton, deceased. Her mother, Annabelle Crofton, removed her from her lawful home without consent of the family. That mother is now deceased. The child's nearest male relative, Mr. Edmund Crofton, seeks to fulfill his duty as uncle and guardian. He went on. Blood relation, financial stability, proper family structure, the importance of raising a child among her own kind. The words washed over Marcus like muddy water. Garrett responded. The child was thriving in her current placement. Removal would cause emotional harm. Mr. Holloway was a man of means and reputation, fully capable of providing for the child's needs. More words, more paper, the wheels of law grinding forward. Whitfield listened, took notes. His face revealed nothing. Finally, he set down his pen. Mr. Holloway. Marcus looked up. This court has heard arguments from both counsels, but I find myself curious about something. As Whitfield leaned forward. You have no blood relation to this child, no legal standing, no prior connection of any kind. Yet, you've hired expensive lawyers and prepared to fight a battle you have little chance of winning. He paused. I'd like to know why. The courtroom went still. Garrett started to rise. Your Honor, my client isn't obligated to. I'll answer. Marcus stood. The brass button pressed against his thigh through the fabric of his pocket. He looked at Edmund Crofton, at the judge, at the faces watching from the gallery. Then he began to speak. 19 years ago, Marcus said, my wife died in a line shack 8 miles north of my ranch. She was giving birth to our daughter. I wasn't there. The courtroom held its breath. I rode through a blizzard to find a doctor. The doctor wouldn't come for a man with no money. By the time I got back with help, Sarah was gone. The baby was gone. Everything I loved in this world was gone. He didn't look at Edmund, didn't look at the gallery, just looked at Whitfield, speaking the truth he'd buried for 2 decades. I spent the next 19 years making sure I'd never be that helpless again. Built a ranch, built a fortune, built walls so high nothing could get in. He paused. Turns out nothing could get out either. Whitfield's pen had stopped moving. 2 weeks ago, a woman died in my barn. Stranger, never seen her before. She put her child in my arms and begged me to take her. Said she was all the good she ever done. His voice cracked. He let it. I didn't want to. Didn't want to feel anything again. Didn't want to risk losing something else. But that child, he stopped, breathed. That child walked through every wall I'd built like they weren't there. She sat with me in the dark when I broke apart. She gave me something I thought I'd never have again. And what was that? Whitfield asked quietly. A reason to stay. Silence. Absolute. I'm not her blood, Marcus said. I'm not her kin. I don't have papers or legal standing or any of the things that matter in a courtroom. All I have is this. When her mother was dying, she asked me to take her child, and I said yes. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the brass button, held it up so the light caught the worn metal. This belonged to my wife. I've carried it for 19 years. This morning, that little girl gave it back to me, told me to bring it home. His hand closed around it. I intend to keep that promise. He sat down. The courtroom remained silent. Then the doors opened. Clara walked in. She moved down the aisle with the dignity of a woman who'd survived things that would have broken most men. In her hands, she carried a folder of papers. Your Honor. Her voice was steady. I have testimony that may be relevant to this case. Whitfield frowned. This is highly irregular. It's evidence, Your Honor, about Mr. Edmund Crofton. Edmund shot to his feet. This is outrageous. This woman has no standing. Sit down, Mr. Crofton. Whitfield's voice was ice. He looked at Clara. Approach. Clara handed him the folder. Whitfield read. His face changed. Mr. Crofton. The judge's voice had gone cold. These are sworn affidavits from 2 women in Colorado. They describe a pattern of behavior involving young women in your care. Women who subsequently disappeared. Edmund's mask shattered. Lies. Fabrications. The word of... He stopped himself. But everyone heard what he didn't say. Whitfield closed the folder. This court finds that the welfare of the child is best served by remaining in Mr. Holloway's custody pending a full investigation into Mr. Crofton's fitness as guardian. He fixed Edmund with a stare that could have frozen fire. You are not to approach the child or the Holloway property. Violation will result in immediate arrest. He banged the gavel. This hearing is adjourned. The courtroom erupted. Edmund was shouting at his lawyer. The gallery buzzed with whispers. But Marcus didn't hear any of it. He looked at Clara. She nodded once. He walked out of the courthouse into the pale winter sunlight. The crowd parted around him. He didn't see them either. All he saw was the road home. And, for the first time in 19 years, the word home meant something more than walls and silence. Spring came slow that year, but it came. The snow melted in patches, then rivers, then all at once. Green pushed up through the brown. The meadowlarks returned, filling the mornings with song. 6 weeks had passed since the hearing. Edmund Crofton had fled the territory ahead of an arrest warrant. The investigation Clara had started was growing. More women coming forward, more stories surfacing. Justice was moving, slow but certain, the way justice sometimes did when good people refused to stay silent. But that was the world's business. Marcus had business of his own. On a morning in early April, he and the child walked to the east pasture. They carried a sapling between them, a young apple tree, roots wrapped in burlap. Clara's idea. Something living, she'd said. Something that'll grow. The cottonwood stood tall against the pale sky, its branches just beginning to bud. Beneath it, the simple marker, Annabelle. Mother, they dug together. Marcus showed the child how to hold the shovel, how to break the soil, how to make a hole deep enough for roots to take hold. She watched everything, copied everything. Her small hands got dirty, and she didn't seem to mind. When the hole was ready, they lowered the sapling in, packed the earth around it, poured water from the canteen Marcus had brought. The child stood back and studied their work. Then she reached into her pocket, the brass button. Marcus's breath caught. He'd given it back to her after the hearing, hadn't asked for it again. It was hers now. Whatever it meant, wherever it had been, it belonged to her. She held it for a moment, turned it over in her fingers. Then she knelt and pressed it into the soil at the base of the sapling, planting it, letting it go. Marcus watched the tarnished metal disappear into the dark earth. 20 years of grief, buried with a tree that would outlive them both. The child looked up at him and spoke. Pretty. One word, soft, certain, the first word he'd ever heard her say. His throat closed. He nodded. Yeah, he managed. It is. They walked back toward the house. The child's hand found his, small fingers wrapping around 2 of his, the way she always did now. He didn't pull away, didn't grip too tight, just held on. Clara was on the porch, watching them come. She wasn't humming today. She was singing, soft and low, the words carrying across the still air. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Zeke sat in the rocker beside her, penny spinning between his fingers. He nodded once as Marcus and the child climbed the steps. The child stopped, looked up at the house, at Clara, at Zeke, at Marcus. Home? Her second word, a question this time. Marcus looked at the house he'd built to keep the world out. 14 rooms, most of them empty. Walls thick enough to stop bullets. A fortress against everything that might hurt him. But the walls had never protected him. They'd only made the loneliness echo louder. Until now. Yeah, he said. Home. The child nodded, satisfied. She climbed the porch steps and went to Clara, who gathered her up like she'd been doing it all her life. Marcus stayed at the fence line. The sun was setting behind the mountains, turning the new grass gold. Somewhere in the east pasture, a young apple tree was taking root. Beneath it, a brass button was becoming part of the earth. And here, on this porch, a family was becoming itself. The child pointed at the horizon. Pretty. Marcus nodded. The wind stirred, soft, almost warm. It sounded like breath, like blessing, like the world, finally, forgiving him. He didn't say anything. Some things were too sacred for words.